All right, let's talk about something huge: happiness. It's this thing we're all chasing, right? The ultimate goal. But what if I told you the way we're all going about it might be completely backwards? Let's dive into that.
No, really, think about that for a second, because a whole lot of scientific research is starting to suggest that our basic instincts about what makes us happy, well, they might be leading us down the wrong path. So let's peel back the layers and see what the science actually says about building a genuinely happy life.
And that's really the heart of the issue, isn't it? We use the word happy to describe everything from finding a great parking spot to, a life filled with meaning. But when scientists try to pin it down and measure it, they find it's just slippery. It's way more complicated than we give it credit for.
To really get our heads around this complexity, we've got to start with a huge problem. How do you even measure happiness? There's this one fantastic observation from writer Eduardo Porter that just perfectly captures how tricky this whole thing is.
He talks about this simple little experiment. It just involves a copy machine and a single 10-cent coin. And honestly, the results are kind of shocking, and they tell us so much about how we think about our own well-being.
Just let that sink in. Finding a dime, a tiny, completely random bit of good luck that's over in a second, was literally enough to make people say their entire life was more satisfying. This little study reveals something huge. Our own self-reported happiness is unbelievably fragile. It seems like we easily confuse a temporary good mood with deep, long-term satisfaction. I mean, finding a dime doesn't actually change your health, your job, or your family, but it can totally change your answer to the big question, so how happy are you?
And that, right there, is the million-dollar question. If we can't really trust our in-the-moment feelings to tell the whole story, then where are we supposed to look? What are the real building blocks of a happy life?
Okay, so this is basically our roadmap for the rest of this conversation. On the left, you've got the usual suspects, right? The things we're told to chase: money, stuff, success. But on the right, that's where decades of actual research are pointing. And we're going to start with that very first clue: connections.
So, the first and maybe the most powerful piece of the puzzle has absolutely nothing to do with how much is in your bank account or what your job title is. Nope, it's all about people.
I mean, just think about that for a second. 80 years. The Harvard study of adult development is one of the longest-running studies of its kind ever. Researchers followed the same group of people from the time they were teenagers all the way into their 90s, through all of life's ups and downs, just to figure out what really matters in the end.
And after all that time, all that data, what was the one single, clearest message they got? It wasn't fame, it wasn't fortune. The head of the study, Robert Waldinger, summed it all up like this: just, period. The quality of our relationships is the #1 predictor of our happiness and even our physical health over the long haul. So what does a good relationship even mean in this context? Well, the research showed these strong bonds act like a shield. They protect us from life's stresses. People with these connections were physically healthier, and their brains stayed sharp for way longer. And here's the key: it's not about being a social butterfly with hundreds of friends. It's about having a few people in your corner who you can truly, deeply count on. Okay, so investing in relationships is absolutely critical. But the science of happiness has another major surprise up its sleeve, and this one really messes with our ideas about what it means to look out for #1.
We usually think that the most direct way to get a little happiness boost from our money is to, buy stuff for ourselves. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the opposite is actually true? And this is where it gets really counterintuitive. A team of researchers found that people who spent money on other people, it didn't matter if it was a $5 coffee for a friend or a big donation, they reported a way bigger jump in their own happiness than the people who spent that same money on themselves.
There's actually a name for this: pro-social spending. And it's not a one-off thing. This has been shown again and again in different studies. Using what we have to help other people gives us a more reliable and longer-lasting boost to our own well-being than just acquiring more stuff.
You see the pattern here, right? Both of these massive scientific clues are pointing to the exact same thing. From the 80-year Harvard study to these spending experiments, the evidence is overwhelming. A truly happy life seems to be built on a foundation of community, our connections with others, and what we contribute to them.
So, we've busted a few myths, we've looked at the evidence. What now? What does a science-backed blueprint for a good life actually look like when you put it all together?
Well, it boils down to a pretty simple 3-part game plan. First, learn to look past the temporary moods. Don't mistake finding a dime for true satisfaction. Second,
Pour your time and energy into your close relationships. It is the single best investment you can possibly make. And third, make generosity a practice. Find ways to use what you have to help others, which, by the way, just makes those relationships even stronger.
And that, right there, is really the biggest takeaway from all of this. The joy you get from finding a dime is passive. It just happens to you. But the deep, real, lasting happiness that the science points to, that's active. It's not something you find, it's something you have to build, piece by piece, through connection and contribution.
Look, this research isn't a magic formula, right? It's not going to give you all the answers. But what it does give us is a much, much better map. It points us away from the shiny objects and fleeting feelings and towards the meaningful work of connecting with each other. So the only real question left is, what are you going to build with it? Thanks for tuning in.